So today we have Arkham, Logo, Daedalus, whatever else, whatever other moniker he goes by on Twitter. Famous, world-renowned author, Twitter sphere, luminary, whatnot. How are you doing, man?
I'm pretty good, man. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. Happy to finally sit down and talk with you. It's been far too long, and I wanted to hear your extended thoughts on some topics that the medium itself, the Twitter medium, doesn't allow you to go depth into. So let's just start. I just want to hear, like, how did your book come to fruition?
Um, it's hard to describe like the process of writing fiction because at least for me, it's a lot of like serendipity and a lot of like contingency, a lot of like chances. Like I don't know if it would have been written had like certain things not happened in my own
I
life or if I
understand
wasn't in
that.
certain places to
I
receive like certain ideas.
Yeah.
But it really came to me like most of the plot, the character, like the type of character I wanted, and like some of the settings and like the kind of deeply embedded trauma that's like at the center of the book, that well, like literally the physical center of the book if you're reading it,
Hmm.
like where it goes into the protagonist's past and whatnot, was
Yeah.
like really what came to me first.
Hmm.
It was when I was living in New York, so it's very much a book like about New York, I think.
Yeah, I definitely got that. It was very, very urban, very critical of that.
Yeah, and I kind of wrote it as soon as I got out of New York, and I was kind of considering it to be like a kind of inferno for me. It's like the structure is like really based off of like going into deeper layers of hell and then like trying to come out on the other side.
That's what I noticed. It starts, and you go in, and then he never really leaves, does he? I don't want to spoil it, but he never really leaves.
Well, I'm not gonna like enforce my own interpretation, but I left a lot of things ambiguous. But there's also some like breadcrumb trails, I think, which would
Yeah,
point to like different ways of reading it.
like it's a very enjoyable read. I'm actually always gonna sit down and reread it. A couple days ago, I thought, like, yeah, it's a fucking good book. I should retry that. And I just saw, like, right before we got on this cast, there's a William Guppy guy, and he took that very first paragraph, and he's just like, look how shit this book is, and like
Yeah,
it
it's kind of funny. That's the major criticism of it is like the Amazon preview, and like it's usually contextualized as if like this is me doing my earnest best to like sound really smart or something, like
yeah.
which is like, even though like the joke is about like how overinflated this person's self, like the protagonist, like selfhood is like,
Mhm.
and that kind of breaks down at different points, and like there's different sorts of styles that appear like in it. Like I put a lot of thought into like setting things up like this, but
Yeah,
then I
well,
feel like most people like they don't give me the benefit of the doubt, I guess.
they probably don't buy the book. They probably just see, like, yeah, like you said, the Amazon preview, and they're like, oh fuck this whole thing. But they don't even realize that there's an actual book in there that's really good. You
Yeah,
know what you're doing. Like, you know what you're doing. We see your tweets. You're a good writer. You're not like that overly pretentious with your writing.
yeah, it's like I think I just also like I tend to assume that people are going to pick up references and things or like specific allusions
Hmm.
that they don't necessarily do, because like I also have like a pretty niche taste myself. Like I think a lot of these people probably wouldn't like reading a lot of like modernist, like early modernist era satire, where like writing in this kind of ridiculous way to like show the pretentious nature of like certain characters and stuff was
Who
a
would you
huge
say
like
some
stylistic innovation.
Who'd you say some modernists are that you could point out that would be like, maybe not your style, the people that you draw from, but the people that you read mostly?
I would say like, well, specifically for this, like I'm thinking of like the way like Wyndham Lewis's prose works, or even like Carlyle's prose. Like they're very like kind of plotting or like difficult to read. Like they don't really flow well, but they kind of have their own like people would like if Wyndham Lewis turned in any of his stuff in the creative writing MFA world of today, he'd
Yeah,
have like all of his words like mashed down into like some tiny little like New York Times style fucking paragraph with like the correct amount of adjectives. There
yeah.
would be none of like the tensions or the like ambiguities and stuff, or just even like the jaunty rhythms or fucking angular weirdness of some like of the modernist prose, which was made to like make you feel alienated, like the characters within it.
Well, I've noticed with your book, one thing I recall is that now I'm not like a book historian or I don't know. I haven't read like loads of books like you have, but you were able to describe scenes with like the depth that like Dostoevsky has, where he's able to go super in depth and like extremely descriptive, but it was also like there was a novelty to it to where like it was entertaining and it was like the weirdness would grow as you explain. Whereas Dostoevsky's like it's like very descriptive, you know?
Yeah, I kind of like like probably the biggest influences I think stylistically. Man, there's so many that like books that I was like thinking about when I was writing it at the time. But in particular, in that sort of way, like you're saying, like Dostoevsky, I'd say like yeah, like there's certainly a certain origin in that Dostoevsky's was like hugely indebted to Gogol, as am I. Like I was really trying to write a kind of like Gogolian, kind of like late Gogol, St. Petersburg period book, like The Portrait, or like he had a lot of crazy stuff about just like modernity and it driving people crazy, like Diary of a Madman and
Mm-hmm.
other short stories like that. And like, you know, I guess
Seems
Kafka gets tied into that. And but
yeah.
most specifically of like forgotten people, I think like Andrei Bely, who was a writer in the Russian Silver Age, like wrote just up until the revolution. And he was like the Russian James Joyce almost, like in his like stylistic innovations and kind of like explosive prose. His prose is like insane. Like it's really difficult to translate, almost impossible. But stuff like that was influential to me extremely.
A lot of Russians popped up. Do you think there's a similar quality? Like, cause I hear you all the time. You're always writing about Nabokov. You're always writing about Dostoevsky and whatnot. And then the two other guys, Gogol and the last guy you just mentioned.
Pushkin
Yeah, like
or Andrei Bely. Yeah, I'm like a
Tolstoy
big
too.
Russian literature fan.
No, like
Tolstoy, huge.
it
Yeah.
seems like Russian literature kind of. It seems like there's a lot of depth there. There's a lot of very high quality authors just brimming the whole country.
Well, I feel like it's because they had like they went from almost like the furthest back part of antiquity you can imagine for the West in general, where like they have this very strong like Eastern Orthodox Church, which is like using Old Church Slavonic and is like more based off of like Byzantine, like you know Eastern Roman Empire
Mm-hmm.
type of civilization, then like modernizes extremely swiftly and like is only really modernizing in like the cities and not so much like on the frontiers. And that's kind of like what happened in America as well, where you have like these massive differences between like the country and the city. And it's like how, you know, like moving between those worlds is like where that sense of like alienation is, or like where these things sort of seem like more paranormal in some way, like a lot of occult references and things.
Yeah, like Owen Cyclops talked about how like people in NYC, like there's literally no connection between people in NYC and people in Texas regarding anything except like vague allegiance to the United States. Other than that, like all values are different, ways of speaking are different, thought patterns, like how do you do everything is different.
Yeah, I mean, New York City isn't even really a part of America because, as Marshall McLuhan said, like in America, you go inside to be with people and you go outside to be alone. But in New York, you go outside to be with people and you go inside to be by yourself. So, like in New York, you have your little cubicle, and then you like in your tiny apartment, and you're there when you want to be by yourself, and then you go out when you want to be with people. And that's like more the case for like European cities where you can like walk around and stuff, whereas like we like car culture everywhere else like makes just like the basic style of life totally different.
How are you like in Texas right now compared to New York?
Dude, quality of life wise, it's not even close. Like I feel like everyone living in New York City is a sucker because everything's super expensive and super shitty for what you're paying for it. Like it's really, you're paying for the lifestyle of like being a New Yorker, but I really don't think it's worth that much.
Yeah, I was up there for a shoot, and like it was fun for a week. I'll say that. Like just walking around, like seeing the city and whatnot, all the architecture, and the loads of people and all that stuff. It was cool, but I realized like halfway through, I was like, "There's absolutely no way I could live here. Like no way. It's way too much in such a tiny area."
Yeah, it kind of changes. Like I lived there for like 6 years, so I kind of like, which is like was like a quarter of my life at that point before I
Mhm.
left. So like I've kind of like absorbed a lot of it, and gone through many phases with it. But it definitely has like this kind of Stockholm syndrome you start getting after living there for a long enough time, where you have to like start making justifications for like why you're staying.
Yeah, I mean, I bet like I was looking at like I live in California, so prices are very high here in New York and whatnot. We're similar in that regard. And I was just looking at Texas apartments, Ohio apartments. You can get something like 3 times the size of something here for like literally a quarter as much. It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm gonna have like a mortgage pretty soon that's gonna be lower than the rent that I was paying in New York. So it's just like like I didn't have a dishwasher or like a washer dryer. I didn't have like anything when I lived in New York. You literally live like on this like totally, unless you're like, you have to have so much money to have like what would be like a middle class quality of life. It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, like, do you think like I see more and more? Let's see the zeitgeist kind of shifting more and more to be like maybe these cities aren't that good. Maybe this is not the way of life. All the Bugman memes and whatnot. Do you think we're going to see a shift of people moving from the cities out to the rural areas or like the sort of smaller town lifestyle?
I see less of that, and I see more of like the cities themselves reshifting, like their populations. Like you look at like gentrification and just like the general change of these like old factory or warehouse districts are now like where all the cool hip bars and hipsters are, or whatever. Like if you think
Mhm.
about like Williamsburg was where a bunch of warehouses were, and like Vice
Right.
started there because it was like cheap. It was like cheap
Right.
real estate, and that's kind of like there's so many like little secondary cities all around. Like in Texas, there's like a few. Like Texas has most like the like a lot of the largest cities in America inside of it, and also like its corporate tax rates are like very amenable to all these huge companies leaving California as soon as like
Hmm.
it stops being profitable for them to be there. So
Yeah.
like I don't know, it really is like the world of the future. I think is these sorts of second cities or like cities that people don't really like, not LA and New York, but everywhere
Yeah.
else.
Yeah, no, I think people are getting tired of those places. They're getting run down, and people are liking the medium sized city vibe. Like San Diego near me, it's like it's a very me it is a very medium sized city, and a lot of people are moving down here from LA and whatnot because they're like this is the only sane part of California left. Traffic's way less, like cost of living is like a bit less, so it's just better overall.
Yeah, it's kind of one of the ironies, right, of the internet or everything being connected in this way, where it's like it used to be, or at least one of the reasons why I wanted to move to New York was I thought like, this is what you do if you want to make it as like a writer or like in any sort of creative fashion. You have to like know all these people. So like you're really moving there to like be in like, potential networks or for like networking or whatever. But that's not really how things work at all anymore, and all the interesting art that the people who live in New York commentate on is all stuff that's happened on the internet and is like, a bunch of like random kids mostly creating their own networks. Like, you look at every like burgeoning hip hop group or whatever the fuck that the people in like Brooklyn lofts writing about them and telling you why they're like valuable culture, like writing about like Young Thug or whatever.
Yeah.
Like all of these people had created their shit like on MySpace, like back in the day or whatever. Like they were networking on the internet and then made that stuff, and then it gets noticed
And then they all
later.
kind
Like
of they all kind of collected together into a little like hive mind, right? And you have to be part of the little hive mind. You have to have the same values as this little hive mind. You have to do the same. You have to like the same work. You have to dress the same way as this little hipster
Well,
hive
it's a lot more like what I always compare it to is it's a lot more like the theater kids or whatever in high school, and
mind. Yeah.
I really see like everything kind of replicates itself as like these sort of high school cliques, and you can kind of identify like what someone was like in high school a lot of the times. by where they end up. So this is like the same sort of like gossipy, like backbiting sort of shit that happens in like those exact circles.
Yeah, it's really weird. It's like high school just gets extended out, with.
Well, it makes sense if you think about it. Like you spend most, like phenomenologically, time like speeds up as you get older because you're encountering less and less novelty. But and you're also like, you have routines and like, you can kind of space out more because there's less novelty. You have less to like accumulate in your brain.
Yeah.
So I think it makes sense that people like recreate even subconsciously the sort of socialization and the structures that they spent most of their lives in. Like most of their like real life is like, in your childhood or adolescence.
Yeah. And I guess there's two ways to do that. There's like recreate high school, which can obviously lead you down the Brooklyn hipster path, or it's like go forth and seek out the new things. But that's not approved by society, like moving out of the place, meeting new people, trying that new thing that you've never done before, writing that book that you've been holding off, right? They don't want you to do that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because like I would say like a lot of people would characterize our corner of the internet or whatever the fuck, however you want to describe it, as being very closed-minded. Like a lot of them would describe us like as being closed-minded or like having very like firm like bigotries or whatever dogmas that have to be dismantled by them. Right. But it's usually not the case. Usually like the most like open-minded people are, for whatever reason, the people over in this corner, and it's just because like you just get shunted over there if you're like saying like you wouldn't find some idea that you'd refuse to engage with.
Yeah, like I will say like the free thinkers in this corner are a lot freer thinking than the free thinkers in other corners, right?
And especially more than the people who brand themselves as free thinkers. Like those are the worst people of all.
Like the internet, intellectual dark web and whatnot, those types of people.
Yeah, they're like the least open to discussing almost anything, or like even admitting like the terms of discussion, or that people are discussing certain things.
They just want to get paid to have conversations about having conversations. That's it.
Yeah, about how like we got to have conversations and how conversations are going to like change things by having them.
Wow, they get paid millions of dollars just to speak and work at colleges.
Yeah, it's all very weird right now. Almost everything is like, I don't know, it's hard for me to write to describe anything today because it's like I feel like it's like art is almost like totally outmoded by reality at this point. Like that, the kind of artistic process is now endemic to like the fucking nature of reality now. So like everything is a performance or has like multiple levels of performance to it.
Well, yeah, like there was Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman talked about how like the television medium, the visual medium, just makes everything just a stage performance. Everything is, grandiose, hyperbolic, absurd. And then so it's like if that's where we're supposed to be getting our news from, our information from, and that's absurd and that's ridiculous and that's, over dramatic and whatnot, then what's real life gonna turn in response to that?
Yeah, it's even gotten worse since Postman's time because like now thinking about like TV or like television as being like the most important medium, which it still is in a kind of fucked up way when it comes to like the older population. But even thinking of it in that term is like pretty anachronistic because like the content really that's on TV is like being written up by like interns or fucking writers. It's things, and all of those people are online getting their ideas. So like it like TV is like a step reality below the like real like hyper reality that informs everything, which is like shit that happens online is now like the real world. And the real world is just less than that.
It's like the TV's market is boomers and they can't connect to the internet, and so the people that run the internet and are in the internet need to have a way to connect to boomers so they can make their money and they can do their propaganda. So they have to filter it through this TV, which is this extremely inefficient medium compared to internet. But the boomers are like, fuck that, I just want to turn on Fox News and watch. I'm not going to go on YouTube. So they have to do this like horrid process where they have to distill the information, turn it in sound bites, have the
Yeah,
angel
it's
presentation.
all like vertically integrated. Like all of it's very machine like,
Yes.
but people are also like so willing to go along with it and play their parts in it that I don't know. It's like it's a really confusing time because it's like, how do you even describe what is happening without it seeming more absurd? Like if you were, a lot of stuff that happens is like, if this was a premise, like you'd be consider it heavy handed, like there's certain things I thought about doing in the book that I was like, no, that's like too heavy handed or whatever. But then like they sort of like pop up in reality. Like
Yeah,
there's
you're like, it's too heavy. You're like, I want to commentate on it, but if I even touch it, like it's already heavy handed because it's just already so fucking absurd.
yeah, exactly. Like it's sort of like why I know everyone fails at like parodying Donald Trump is because like you really can't.
Yeah, he's just
Like there's
is.
no effective way to like he already contains his own excess.
You know that there's like the David Hawkins level of consciousness where it's like really low is like anger, and then it's fear, and then it's like courage and whatnot. Like at the
Sure, sure.
very top, it's like like the description is like life is, right? It's not like life is great, it's just life is. It's like that's Trump. He's just living up there. Trump is, and everyone else is down here like struggling to make fun of him, but he just is.
Yeah, it's sort of like it's often like the Trump Twitter timeline really is what I imagine it must have felt like for Kajev to fucking read Stalin or whatever, or for Hegel to see Napoleon, because like he really is like the fucking world spirit right now. Like Trump exists and
Man,
everything else like exists less. Like
yeah.
everything exists in relation to him. It's fucking crazy.
Yeah. Well, that's how we frame things with world leaders now. If you like, even if it's negative, it's like, how does Trump fit into this? What is Trump's angle with this? How Trump fucked with this guy? Why Trump is bad for this? All this stuff. He's the touchstone of the age.
He's like the center. He's the ruler. He's the king of the globe. Like he's the real world emperor. Like I'm starting to like I try not to think about the end of history as like a concept because it starts to sound too correct to me after a while, and it's like the most dismal fucking idea in the world. But like if you really think about it, like we might not technically have like a global super state quite yet, but as far as like the media is concerned, or as far as like the global consciousness is concerned, Donald Trump has been like king of the universe for like a while.
Yeah, I mean, aggressive tweeting mixed with, like the grandiose display mixed with, you know, communication across the entire world. Everyone can just pull up their phone and see him. Like that's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, and he's like he functions simultaneously as like the like he's like supposed to be the most incompetent buffoon, but he's also like the most fucking evil and genius enemy of all time, right? Like he's
Yeah,
both of these things. He's like both like the scapegoat and like the fool and like the tyrant and like the evil eye. He's
yeah.
like everything.
It's ridiculous. It's like all the archetypes just blended into this one thing. King, warrior,
Yeah,
magician, lover, all in one.
or like there's certain things about my own life at this point that have become like I feel like hackneyed as like plot, if I were to write them out as like a plot trait or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was talking to someone and I was like trying to explain to them that I had like been involved with an art gallery that had opened in London or whatever, and they're like, oh, I'd like to see that. And then I realized that like pretty much all evidence of it is gone. Like all the evidence like is like almost totally absent on the internet. Like you'd have to try really hard to like find the internet archive way back machine type shit
Yeah.
of like the any evidence of like this thing that I know that I did. And the thing is that this art exhibit, like the whole point was that it was destroyed at the end. Like the whole thing was about how it was like like destroying itself, and then like all of this just happened to it anyway. Like I don't know, I feel like we were really on some shit back in like 2016 that people are only starting to understand now more broadly.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is that like the memes have accelerated like way more than 2016, and now we have like now it's penetrating into not quite normie sphere yet, but manosphere self-improvement area. It's getting all the memes that 2016 had. Bap's stuff is getting mainstream, right? He's getting retweeted all by all those people. the raw
Yeah,
egg stuff. Like all this is like it's like seeping out. It was just like ideas that people just laughed about and like grew clout over on Twitter, but now it's like seeping into actual action in the world, which I think is pretty cool.
it's definitely interesting. I don't really know how like seriously to take anything when it's just like, noise on the internet.
Yeah.
Because like, I don't know, the algorithm will just push whatever. Like we live in this kind of fucking nightmare situation because everything's run by like algorithms that are kind of black boxes onto themselves, where even that most of the time the people engineering them don't quite understand them themselves. Like they're just looking for certain outputs, like,
Yeah.
and like all of it's done by heuristics and like iterations that they're not like, fucking watching every single iteration to have a, they're essentially creating like digital organisms that they don't understand. They're like fucking super viruses, these fucking algorithms
Yeah.
that just govern everything now.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty freaking ridiculous what's going on. Just but a bunch
So
of stuff is just happening with no reasons. Things are just happening. That's what I've noticed.
yeah, I tend to agree with like the McLuhan analysis, like media ecology wise, that like the advent of electricity is like the apocalypse, and like we kind of like are living in a kind of continual apocalypse that I guess some people would call like modernity, but at the same time, like the reactions to that, like think about how popular like post-apocalyptic fiction is in general, or like
Mhm.
dystopians in which like an apocalyptic event has happened and everyone's still trying to like survive using the vestiges of the collapsed empire of whatever came before, like think of
Yeah.
Fallout and like using bottle caps as currency and whatnot. Just like this sort of idea, I think, is kind of what it's actually like to be alive now, is that there was this sort of apocalypse and everyone now just kind of, you can walk around and LARPing as like the king, the president or whatever. You can do whatever the fuck you want. Like you just adorn yourself with all this imagery and iconography of the past, and you just pretend that you can pretend to be whatever. I don't really know how seriously
Yeah.
anything is.
Well, that's the thing too. Like when a structure is taken away, right? When a structure dissipates, it's not all bad. Now you have free reign to do what you want. We have free reign now to reshape the world as we know it. There's lots of incredibly intelligent people, incredibly willful people that we all kind of know, we all kind of integrate with and whatnot, and they all have great ideas on things they want to accomplish, things to do, and with more accessible technology, more accessible modes of transportation, and then just also the collapse of the old sort of structures, then there's going to be a lot of chances to completely reshape like the fundamental institutions that we have in this, maybe not in this country because the country might not be here in 40 years, but in the world right now, and whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I don't really know how much like I'm more of like a pessimist, I guess, in
Mm-hmm.
that I don't think that we really like there's this notion that it's like tools exist and they are kind of they're indifferent. This is sort of around gun rhetoric too, where people say like like, oh, like it's like a tool, it's about like the intent or the person using it that matters.
Mm-hmm.
And people say this about technology as well, where it's like technology is neither good nor bad because you can do any, it depends on like what you do with it. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much that is true, because I feel like there's there's just some technologies that exist that are like clearly going to have more negative uses than positive ones.
Mm-hmm.
Like and their thing, like I was just reading about this oh, I forget the name of the company, is like Clearview or something like that, where basically it has like a facial recognition software that ties like your face to like all pictures it can find on like the web. So like it'll find pictures of you that you don't even know exist. Like if you're in like the background of like someone taking a selfie that like you don't know or something, you're or like like there was like a story in it like where one criminal like was like had his mugshot, like they had a picture of his face or something from like robbing a gas station, and they found like another picture of him in the reflection of some girl's gym selfie, and like this helped to like get him arrested. So it's like we're getting to a point where it's like there's these fucking technologies that it's also like all like you can't put them away once they're made. Like once they're invented and they're distributed on the internet, like there's no going back.
Mm-hmm. I
And
mean,
a lot of the times they're like have clearly negative, like clear uses that would be like bad. And it's
yeah,
hard to think of ones that would be as like good.
yeah. I just think that we like I agree with parts of that. I think that whoever's running it, that's more important because obviously like you can take the technology and obviously maybe it has like a 70% bad side, let's just say if we're just using that sort of model, like 70%
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
the time it could be really bad, 30% of the time like it could actually be pretty good. Whoever's running that, that's very important because say you have like a very, doesn't have a lot of trauma. He's very like straight-headed, very good person. Running it, good morals, family guy. You know, he loves the people that he's doing stuff with. Loves the country. Has very good intentions. He has that technology. He's probably can use it better than a very angry sort of person who feels like they've been wrong throughout their entire life, somebody who's been mistreated throughout their entire life, and then they get these tools, right? They get all the power. Well, they're probably going to use it for bad right off the bat.
It's definitely like one way to look at it. Might look at it again, like I'm probably more pessimistic that the technologies themselves like preclude that, like the possibility of that. Like I feel like a lot of the times people are like used as like they think that they're being like ordered by other human agents to do things, but it's all like people being used as conduits for like information transfer, like markets and things like this, where like they're working based off of like the dictates of like oh, our numbers aren't up this month or whatever, so I have to go do this and like leverage this and fire these people or hire these people or move this around or buy this or buy that. And
Yeah,
all of these decisions are being made off of, so like and if you think that like the democratic process or the political process is just also enmeshed within this like technological superstructure, like it kind of precludes the ability for like electing Ted Kaczynski as president, right? Like I feel like electing the guy who said like we're going to turn all of it off, like we're gonna stop this, like that person would not be like it'd be impossible to elect such a person,
mm-hmm.
or
Well,
to give them the power that they ostensibly would need.
you're right. Whatever the answer is, it's a very, 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 very complicated and contextual sort of thing. It's very dependent on like what the technology is, what like the who's running it, what the technology is itself, what the utility is of it, and if there's any influences on it from higher sources. Lots of just minutia.
Well, I think the most important thing is like how it reframes our ability to like conceptualize ourselves. Like like all technologies determine your sense of self, like or like how you narrativize yourself into being. Like people didn't imagine that they were video game characters in a simulation 200 years ago. They may have like had ideas that were similar to that, like
Right.
metaphorically, but like the central metaphors that people use to communicate with about themselves are always based off of like the hegemonic technology. So right now, everyone like imagines themselves not, as Christopher Lash said, as like movie or TV characters, but everyone's imagining themselves as like a protagonist in a video game. And
That's
that's like
great.
the real horror of the future is kind of going to be like leveraging that. Like you can imagine your job turning your like giving you like a fucking level progression and fucking quests to do through the day. Like I swear we're like not far off from this. It's coming.
I mean, if your job's pretty sick, that could be kind of cool. Like if you're like a logger or something, and like every time you hit the wood, it's like Minecraft. Like that could be pretty fucking cool.
Yeah, if only it was like that, man. It won't be like that. It'll be more like it'll be more like working at like the Amazon facilities where they give you like a fucking like sci-fi scanning thing on your wrist that goes onto your finger so you can like scan packages, and
Yeah,
that thing's also like monitoring like your how much time you're spending doing X, Y, and Z, and like your
yeah,
efficiency and like your rate, like your packing efficiency into like the fucking like that's the real. It's gonna be like everything quantified so much that like the last few jobs where they need you to just fucking do stuff are going to be based solely off of your ability to min max the system, I guess. And it's like they're just going to turn everything into gamer stuff. Like that's the idea, I'm pretty sure. And that's ultimately, I think, what Marx was going after, right? Like, people aren't working anymore. Everything's just play. So like everyone's free to be a fucking like video game character with all of their stats tracked.
They tell you you're going to be a video game character, but what they don't tell you is that you're going to be level 1 your entire life. You know.
You know what they don't tell you is that like people can just buy legendary account or whatever. You know, like it's like it's definitely like a free to play game. That's the model of citizenship we're gonna have in the future, or at least like it's happening even now. Where like you're playing in the free to play games. The boomers, when they bought stuff, the DLC came free, but now you have to pay for it.
Just like Fallout, fucking hell. All right, so branching off of that, right? What this has nothing to do with it, so I guess it's not really branching off of it. But the thought just came to me. What books are you reading right now? Like what? Maybe not like the specific book you are reading this current moment, but like
what kind of thing?
Yeah, like what kind of canon have you been like really interested in?
I recently read the new Houellebecq book, Serotonin, which I thought was pretty good. A lot of his books are kind of similar, but this one was pretty good. It was like definitely one of his better ones.
I've never read him. It sounds
he's
like
good.
He has a very similar sort of vein throughout all of his novels.
Yeah, I would say his most like unique one that isn't like his other ones is The Possibility of an Island, which has kind of more like of a kind of science fiction sort of conceit to it, or a little more it's a little more like psychedelic, I guess, than his other stuff, which is more grounded in realism, or like literary realism, but where it'll show like domestic squabbles or things that like are feasible to have happened, as opposed to like his like wild conjectures about 200 years in the future. But I found that book to be his best one, Possibility of an Island. Highly recommend that one. But all of his books, they're easy to read. They're very good. Fun stuff, pretty funny, pretty dark. But I feel like Houellebecq is kind of underrated as a romantic also. Like he really does believe in love, I think, or that, he kind of laments its loss anyway, which is the same thing.
It's funny because when you actually look at him, you're like, holy shit.
Like, I know. It makes sense.
There's that gif. There's that gif of him. It's a really popular one where he's in that biker uniform. He's just dancing.
Yeah, right? He's dancing to Black Sabbath in the original clip. It's pretty good. It's a pretty good clip. Actually, like there's a huge part in Serotonin about like listening to like heavy psych records, like Black Sabbath. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Do you think an author's okay, so there's a whole talk about physiognomy, right? Do you think an author's physiognomy directly reflects their book, or do you think it's more sort of a reflexive thing that you kind of like mind fuck yourself to believe after reading their book? You're like, oh yeah, he looks like that, like definitely.
I don't know. I do like. I actually believe that like the reason why you can make sort of connections like that is because there's like a real aesthetic element in like the bottom of being or of existence itself, which like is where the religious impulse to like identify God comes from. Like you call it what you will. I think God is probably the most useful term, but there does seem to be like these kind of correspondences and things like in not rational ways, but in like symbolic terms that I find like compelling. And I think that are actually like rooted in like the fabric of reality in a way that like we would never grasp like necessarily scientifically. So like, like sometimes you can sort of like tell what kind of person someone is just by like a few minute details or like ways that they carry themselves or like, how their eyes look and things.
I mean, there's a really like Twitter, I guess, makes it easy because it's just a little AVI, but before you click on it, it's pretty small. So sometimes like you'll see a tweet and then I'll just think like, all right, this person's depressed and this person's in her 20s and this person like has a Snapchat, and I click on it and it's exactly that, right? You could just after you're exposed to it 50 100,000 times, you just kind of learn the patterns.
Yeah, pretty much everyone is like just exists like by replicating these sorts of patterns too. Like like there really aren't that many like individuals. Like being an individual is a lot like being a crazy person, and that's how it's treated really today, where the more like you become not comprehensible and by the standard patterns, the more you're like treated as like the way that your pattern would intersect with their pattern analysis will like make them go fucking haywire, or they'll start like glitching out and they'll start like identifying you as all of these absurd like contradictory things just because like whatever you're saying doesn't fit into any way that they could understand anything.
Well, that's what I've learned with selling, is that like there's a part of you that needs to be so, that needs to, like, obviously, because you're marketing, you're trying to get, a certain type of person to come buy your stuff. And so you need to have one toe in the normie sphere at all times, which is pretty freaking annoying for me, because if it was my choice, like, my account would not look like how it looks like right now. But um got to do what you got to do. But it's just, it really is interesting how so much of what you do has to be, if you're trying to, be public standing and make money and do all that stuff, you have to have that public face that's, conformist in a sense.
Or like, non-conformist in the right ways or in a prescribed way, like you can, it's like one of the funny things.
Expected nonconformist.
Yeah, or just like you could call it like traditional nonconformist. I'm a traditional nonconformist because like I think socialism's cool. Like like of course the same way that my parents did and their grandparents. It's kind of funny. Some ironies to that.
Definitely. Now, say somebody just like fresh out of high school, no bearing, they're willing to be shaped in any way possible. You have to give them 3 books, right? And these 3 books can be whatever, right? What would you give them?
I mean, the thing is what's sad about this is that the only thing you can really give, like, it doesn't really matter what the books would be. Because if you give like the best of books to someone who doesn't really have like the willingness to read them or to like really read them or try to read them, like it would be pointless, like, which is one of the problems with like college, right? Is you have all these people who are ostensibly going there to be given lists like this so that they can go do the work. But what they really do is like they get by doing as little as possible. You can like easily game the system by like pretending to have an opinion on a book that you haven't read. And like you start creating like, and that's actually the most efficient strategy. Like if you want to get by really easily and you don't like, you're putting in a lot of like effort to actually read books in school when you don't actually need to.
That's what I found out. Like I realized, I was like, holy shit, like I don't have to read these. Like I could just go online and like pull out some stuff, and I'm already a pretty decent bullshitter as it is. So it just was like, there's no reason for me to read these big books.
Yeah, that's pretty much the truth. That's like the irony, right? Of like everyone assumes that if you talk about anything like this, that you haven't actually read any books and that you're just like trying to be seen as someone who reads books, because that's all you learn now is you learn how to pretend to be someone who reads books,
right?
Without reading books. Like,
right. Well,
that's not really what matters. What matters is like having like the credentials to say like I have like my book reading badge, but like also like don't ask me about specific books.
Yeah, don't ask me about that specific chapter because I'm not going to be able to tell you anything. All right, so let me rephrase that question. Say the kid loves to read, right? He loves to read, super into books, wants to read them properly, right? Not just skim through them and throw them away and get done. Like, actually wants to read, think about it, like write things down, all that stuff. What are the 3 things you would give them to start them off?
I mean, like, this is like it's kind of funny. Like a lot of the syllabuses you'll find in like the liberal arts areas do pretty much get at like a lot of the foundational stuff. Cause it's like, if you really want to be somewhat like be a reader and you really want to like be able to like understand what's going on in the better writing, like the better forms of literature that exist, like you have to be aware of what they're drawing upon. What they're drawing upon is like centuries of writing. And like that, like what is traditionally called the canon. And so like, reading something like Shakespeare, which has a lot of like biblical allegories or like classical allusions and stuff without knowing anything about like Greek or Roman mythology and the Bible, like it's gonna be useless. Like you're not gonna be able to like even parse what's going on. Like if you trying to read all of this without knowing like that Ovid is like a huge influence on the people at the time, and like you haven't read Ovid or you don't even know who that is, like you're gonna just be lost a lot of the time. So it's really the most
measured process. It's a very slow build,
So like what I always say is like the most important people to read or like the most important, like if you want to narrow it down to like a really, really small canon, like you got to read Homer, you've got to read the Bible. And, some people would probably say Virgil, like, but I would probably say Dante. I think Dante is like one of the most important people to read. And I think it's a tragedy that people only read the Inferno most of the time, like that the rest of the comedy isn't mentioned or read, and that even less people read La Vita Nuova, which is like the book before the Inferno, which is like really a hugely like revolutionary text in literary criticism and analysis, while it's also like a book of Dante's own poetry, but it's more about his like analysis of his own poetry is where the real interest is, because it's like without that whole turn to the vernacular in a quote unquote serious literature, none of the literature that we have would like exist at all. Like our whole tradition is based off of literature is based off of Dante.
Right, because didn't Dante, he made his writing simpler, right? He made it more for the so the common folk can understand. Or
It's more like he just didn't write in Latin, right? He was writing in like Italian. He was writing in he was a part of the tradition of like people writing like love ballads and stuff when they were actually like troubadours, like writing real songs. That sonnets were like, you know, the lyrics to songs that were sung. They were doing it in the vulgar tongue, or you know, like Italian, and not in Latin, and like having a literature in like the national tongue or whatever is like what our whole tradition is based off of now, right? With like, you know, if you want to talk about like global literatures with like an S, it's because like there's a bunch of different people writing in their vernaculars.
Mm-hmm.
But what his big shift was as opposed to writing, this is difficult to say. So like, as opposed to writing it like in like ballads, as opposed to writing to like a particular person, there's more about like the trying to replicate like the interiority of the speaker in the poems to replicate, like put you in their position, kind of like metaphorizing an internal feeling, which is like the whole point of.
So changing the context, basically.
It's like being like specifically allegorical. Like he was writing using like scholastic hermeneutics, like the way that people had been interpreting the Bible, but in like a folk medium, like trying to write at like the same 5 levels for like that kind of exegesis of like, you know, the literal, the symbolic, the tropological, the anagogical, etc. But he was doing this for what was basically like pop songs of the time, I guess you could say, in a kind of vulgar way, but like, you know, for like folk songs and stuff, but to like invest them with the same weight that sacred texts had before.
Very good. That's cool. I did not know that. I didn't know about. See, the more you know, So read.
Yeah,
Dante.
I mean, like
read Dante.
Dante is like huge. Everyone should read Dante. Dante is like, and then like obviously like, you know, Shakespeare and Milton. Like the thing is that as soon as you say one thing, like it all explodes, because what's really more fascinating is like the huge like networks of influence that have existed. Like it's inexhaustible, which is why it's really like daunting and kind of terrifying. Like you'll never be able to read like enough books to really get it.
Yeah. Well,
but you're just hoping to find new connections. I think that's like, I'm less interested in people like trying to read all the same books I do, but more trying to like create their own like novel pathways through the amount of literature that already exists, because that's how like you stumble upon like interesting combinations of things that other people wouldn't have had.
Yeah, and it's also like if you do that, and then everybody's path is different. Then everybody has their own like slightly unique take on all the things. They've all read the things in a certain order at a certain stage in life, so it all influences them differently. I think it's very cool, and that's why
it's
you'll read
interesting.
You'll read like a compilation. Like I got a bunch of stuff up here. You read like a compilation text like talking about the books, and then you'll see like some obscure author that you've never seen before, and then you read his stuff, and you're like, holy shit, this is great. Well, why has nobody ever talked about this? And you find out he was friends with this author, then you read his stuff, and then blah, 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 and then you bounce, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's like the most interesting shit, for sure. I feel like we even see this happen in miniature on like a platform like Twitter, right? Where it's like, oh, like who's this person? Like, like I'm interested in this person's thing because they got retweeted by this person or whatever. Oh, like I'm reading their timeline. That's interesting. Like I'll follow them. Like, oh, like they're interacting with these people I haven't heard of. Like, let's check that out. Like, it's all like, it's not any different. It's just over a longer period of time.
Right, and across more sophisticated medium.
Yeah, like a bit larger text or
What
whatever.
what was your what was your path on Twitter? Like when you first got on, like what did you do to get where you are today? Because mine was straight MAGA, like boomer Twitter. Then it was Mike Cernovich. Then that blossomed me into like self-improvement sphere, that sort of thing. And while that was happening concurrently, like people like BAP, Contbot, you, like that type of stuff was going on. Just following a bit of like League of Legends stuff on the side. And then those two worlds started to connect. I cut off from video games completely, and then now I'm kind of like in my own little medium. I'm like between the the self improvement money Twitter side, and then the whatever you want to call it, weird Twitter, whatever this corner.
Yeah. Well, when I first started, I've had my account for a long time, but when I first used it, I mostly used it as like a kind of like notebook for myself for like little like images or things like that. Like I go back and I read my like most early tweets, and it's just like I'm only talking to myself. Like every single tweet would like only be understood by myself. Like it'd be like it was more like something for me to like remember like specific things. It was like writing down in a notebook, like again like little notes. And I didn't really use it in any like real way. It was like, and I didn't really talk to anyone on it. It was just kind of like this. I don't know why I was doing it. I would just like tweet things out into the void when I first got it, when I was in like high school or something. I had like no desire to like use it in any real way beyond that. But eventually I followed people I found interesting. A lot of them in like the NRX sphere or whatever, or like kind of in like that kind of crypto libertarian, like cyber anarchist type spheres also, which it's sort of like, that's another thing people don't talk about is how like much the early Bitcoin shit was like both a left libertarian and a right libertarian thing. Like you'd find this being discussed on like anarcho-communist forums, but also on like ANCAP forums, like that they had this sort of shared interest. It's like the same people who read like Proudhon or whatever still. Like it's either like Austrian economics, like libertarian guys, or like fucking Marxists, like ANCOMs.
It's pretty funny.
It's
There's
interesting.
a couple topics like that just unite people, regardless of if they're polemic, right? It's just some topics.
Yeah. So like I was following a lot of that sort of shit because I was just interested in that, and I was like became like talking to like Cody Wilson specifically like pretty early on, like before he even like started doing a bunch of shit, just because I saw like him, I thought he was like a hilarious troll and like really smart in the way that he was doing that. Like I still, one of my favorite clips of all time is when he was on Glenn Beck's show in like fucking 2010 or something. It was such an incredible moment. Unfortunately what happened to him though as the years went by, but otherwise I was involved with like NRX type shit. Like I remember I liked a lot of the weirder boards on 8chan, not necessarily the politics ones, but there was a lot of I was always interested in like Western esotericism and just like religious history, or like perennialism and traditionalism, and just the various like religious networks that have existed through time, or like how Christianity has changed, all these sorts of things. So I was reading a lot of like esoteric stuff, or like trying to understand like what the Kabbalah was and all this other sort of shit. Reading like, I don't know why, like I guess it's kind of edgy to read that sort of shit, but for whatever reason I was always drawn to it as a kid, or like kind of paranormal stuff. And all of that for some reason like all collapsed together during like I guess the Gamergate time, when 4chan was like everyone left 4chan and was like now like writing on this new forum, and like there were like no rules in this forum, so people were kind of like making up like new amalgamations of boards, so like everything wasn't really split into like specific topics yet, but we're just like all these like weird people with like very niche interests were all discussing things on this like free forum. And that was like, I was like, oh, like this is pretty interesting. And then like I realized like as soon as that kind of died down, all of it went back to Twitter. So I started using my Twitter like more seriously. And I just like I don't know, I just like it's funny because some of my like earliest follows are people who like got really big later or whatever, like via Frog Twitter and stuff like that. Like I remember when everyone had like not even 1,000 sub, like I mean not subs, followers, but subs, but like it was also small, and everyone like kind of knew each other already in this like small network. And like a lot of the faces that are around now are the same ones that are around in like 2016. The thing is just that everyone's audiences are way bigger. It's nuts. Like I remember when he had like 1,000 followers.
Yeah. Oh, me too. Me too. And I remember all the storylines he used to do. Those are so funny.
Yeah, like the medium itself has changed a lot. Like we're pretty much like already at a point where it's kind of stagnated, I think, or like I at least feel like I repeat myself a lot, or like or people are just kind of repeating the same sort of bits. Like it's kind of exhausted. I don't really know what there's like really left to do as like it kind of feels like I don't know. We all got to like put out books or something. That's just because like there's only so much you can really fucking do on Twitter, like using the internet without.
That's kind of what I've kind of realized too, is that like it's best used for networking, like taking things to DMs, really getting to know people, really like collaborating on stuff. Past a certain point, past a certain point, you're told enough times to lift weights, read the Western canon, eat whole foods, and like get a wife. Right? You're told that enough to where it's like just kind of like,
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's like the thing is what was really great about it and why everyone had these sort of like massive increases in their audiences before, like, oh man, Twitter's changed so much in the way that it's moderated too. And just like the way that like just the basic fucking functionality of it works has changed so much in the last couple of years because of what was like what happened in 2016 really, which was like you could just fucking snipe anyone on anything, like, and like the narrative was like the way that it had worked before. There hadn't been these sort of like devoted or like you kind of like underground organized groups to like just absolutely change the narrative by like people call it like reply cucking or whatever, but like when you can like inframe something by quote tweeting it and then like get more exposure on like your inframing of that's like essentially you winning in the narrative in a lot of ways, like because your frame has succeeded where their frame failed. So like you can
literally, like it's literally bigger than their frame.
Yes. No, like it even looks like that. Like, but this is like how you'd understand it. Like you turn what they said into content by like framing it with an interpretation.
Right.
That so like they're no longer what they're saying is no longer the last word, right? But like you've like created a way around them, which makes them look absurd or ridiculous. And a lot of this happened like a lot more back in the day when it was a lot harder to do block lists and mute lists, and people there was less like shadow banning and stuff. So like you'd have like huge like a lot of the memes now that are just like sort of standard across the entire internet, like everyone suddenly having an opinion on Ted Kaczynski was not the case at all like 5 years ago. Like the fact that almost everyone now has like an opinion on the Industrial Revolution and its consequences, or like whatever they always call him like an anarcho-primitivist. I don't think that's exactly accurate, but or like a lot of these sort of niche ideas, like the incel itself as a term has now become like it's really been crazy to watch how this happens, like how all these memes spread out. And like I don't know, the hysteria around it, we sort of I think bought into ourselves, where it was like everyone was really paranoid. Like that's part of like the anonymity, or like for good reason. A lot of people get doxxed, and like I know people have had like the fucking FBI called on them or whatever by random people online. Like random people online are fucking assholes. Like
they are,
like, and they'll take shit to another level.
It's always like the 20 follower person that just gets mad at your post, and then that just ruins your whole life.
Yeah, like just like, or like you get like legitimately insane people. Like I have like legitimately insane people send me DMs all the time, and I'm like, I just trying to kind of like talk them down from shit. But like it's really wild out there. It's hard to explain. To get to a certain level, like you also become like a meme yourself, and like people use whatever you're doing. Like you know what I mean? Like you just become another part of you like shut off this fictional part of yourself kind of, and like you become an image that people then use to represent certain things.
You transcend. Like BAP's the best example. Like literally there's I don't want to say a third, let's say like a fourth of everything I see on my Twitter, on my TL is somehow stemmed from BAP, whether that's the fitness part, whether that's the bodybuilding part, the health part, the mogging part, like something stemmed from him. and it's just everywhere now.
Yeah, and what's crazy is that like BAP was like one of these like sort of people like on these like fringe forums when all this sort of shit came together. Like BAP's been online for a very long time, and like not everyone out there has read the archives or knows like the mysterious the esoteric writings of BAP. But
Like,
let me tell
I
you, it's been
remember
around for a long time.
I was on Solo Forum for a bit. I remember his, they had threads just like collecting everything in archives of him, and I would just go through it and be
Yeah,
like, "Oh, like this guy is he's so well read. What the hell? This is absurd."
yeah, it's kind of funny. Like BAP is always like people try to think that he's like dumb or that his message is like really simple, but then like when you hear him talk or he writes in like long form and a little bit less in character, I guess. Like it's become it's like so obvious that he knows way more about everything than anyone
So
expects him to.
he definitely he dumbed down his message and made it mimetically viable. He knows exactly what he's doing. That's the thing. Everything is
Yeah, no, he's like
perfectly
a
planned.
genius.
Yeah, everything's perfectly planned. He's probably like 140, 150 IQ. That was exactly what he's doing, running this whole thing. It's great. It's great. Honestly,
Yeah, it's like it's been cool to see all of this happen, like or like Delicious Tacos. Like I was like a fan of his long before I ever became like friends with him.
yeah.
But and like all this sort of shit, like it's definitely like I don't know, like I can't imagine having gone any other route. Like my whole goal really was to like write and write things that people found interesting. And I think Twitter is like a really good spot to figure out if what you have to say is of interest to anyone, because like it's like the lowest amount of investment that an audience could possibly have is to like see your tweets. Like you're not really asking much of them.
No.
Like it's not like a fucking documentary or something, or like
Right.
a 30-minute long video, or like a huge book or an essay or something that you're hoping people will read for no fucking reason. Like like oh god, like imagine just writing a blog without any sort of audience or whatever, and you just like are writing on this blog in this corner of the internet that like never links to anything else. So there's like never hyperlinked to anything else.
No.
Like no one will ever read.
That's yeah. In that sense, Twitter's probably like if you're a writer or some sort of creator and you know how to use it properly, Twitter's the best to grow an audience, because you can really just connect with. You can actually like you can exchange memes, and like the conversation on Twitter is a lot better than having a conversation in Instagram DMs, just from my experience.
Yeah, it's like it really is like the only real forum left on the internet. Like even just by the way it works, just like formally it works much better to have like real conversations on than I don't know, like Reddit, like or like things where or like YouTube comments or something. Like a lot of the other systems are kind of infected by kind of democracy, and not in the good kind, but in the kind where it's like if you say anything controversial, what you're
Reddit's
saying is
democracy. Yeah.
yeah. Whereas what Twitter does is anything controversial is the most evident thing. Like things that are controversial are the things that get the most engagements.
Yeah.
So like
Well, that's the thing.
because
Like, it's such a
yeah.
simple platform, right? There's not much to it at the end of the day, but that's why it's so good.
I mean, that's the same with like the reason why 4chan was good, or like does have elements of it that are good, is just because it's still part of this kind of like Web 1.0 mindset and like the way that is designed. Like if they made 4chan's format look different, it probably wouldn't work anymore, even if like the functionality was still the same. It's
No,
something to do with like the design itself.
part of the fun is logging on, seeing how absolutely terrible it looks, and then seeing all these like horrendous and absurd things just posted. Like it's funny just going on it. It's funny in its own right.
Yeah, Twitter's like pretty much the same, where it's like really simplistic,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the most like abstracted form of social media you can find, where it's literally just like the timeline.
Yeah,
That's all that there
that's
is.
it.
There's like almost no real functionality outside of that. Like they add their fucking moments tabs and all this other shit, but not
Nobody
like
cares.
it's no one gives a fuck about that.
Next book. Next book. What can you give us any insight on next book, next project, something like that?
Well, I'm working on it right now. Been working on it for a bit. Probably gonna be working on it for quite a while still, because it's gonna be quite a bit longer than my first one, and a little like I think it'll probably be bigger in a way, like meaning like more people will read it or more people will like it. I'm
Mhm.
trying not to do as much like, I guess, experimental formalism in it. It's going to be more of a chill book, I guess, more
Straight
closer
story.
to,
Would you say it was more of
yeah.
a straight story, hero's journey structure in a sense?
Well, kind of, but it's just going to be like, the narrative style is just going to be simpler, like shorter sentences and things, but it's going to be over a longer period of time, which is like the opposite of the first one, which is like
Right.
really like labyrinthine, but in a very condensed in like a very short amount of time.
Yes.
So I want to do like the opposite of that. Thematically, I kind of want to do like, I want to write something that's like very, very different from my first one, down to like the color palette is going to be based on orange. That's probably the best fucking clue I could give. Is that it's going to be an orange book.
It was, there was that period where everybody released their books, right? Like last year, like there was Bat Book, your book, Mike Ma's book, and I think there was one more.
Delicious Tacos had a book.
Delicious Tacos.
Finally, some good news.
Maybe it was that.
Control Creep had a book.
Something. Yeah, something. But I remember like every, like the main color on every book was way different. It was like Babs was orange, yours was dark blue. Mike Ma's
was yellow. Yeah, it looked like the legendary birds from fucking
Yeah.
the first gen of Pokemon. I remember someone.
It was kind of surreal that like that happened like that. It was really, it's interesting.
I think they all kind of fun, were, like the color choice, I think is really indicative of like the kind of the writing inside of it. Like so I find that stuff to be very important.
Like Mike Ma's book was just like crazy. It's just crazy. It's like, but it's like an aggressive sort of crazy, whereas yours
it's like very electric.
Yes,
I'd call it electric, and it was like yellow. Like
very good way to describe it. Yours is a very like, it's very convoluted. It's very slow. It's like a sludge sort of that's like slowly churning, because it's not like a hyper fast paced book, but
it's supposed to be like, like a shitty Sunday taking place like in like this time of year almost, right? Where it's like early, like the beginning of the year, it's like kind of wintry still, but it's just like raining and there's just like slush everywhere, especially if you're in like a northeastern city or like a northern city where it's just kind of like nasty.
For me, it's 65 and sunny outside, so I can't really relate.
It's like I understand. I live in the South now too, but we still have days like today, honestly. Like today is like the exact sort of day I'm talking about, where the kind of fog of the rain and like the fluorescent lights and things make the city kind of blue.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely get that. It was a good the atmosphere was really good with that. Definitely very good. Are we ever going to see Kerry Turnbull again, or is he retired as a character? Plan on doing.
I'm pretty sure he's retired as a character. I might make some cheeky fucking allusions to it for my own laughs at some point.
Yeah,
probably. There was a time where I thought I was going to name my next character the closest thing possible to like Kerry Turnbull. I was going to make his last name like Trumbull or something, but I don't think I'm going to do that anymore. But I thought that would have been funny.
Yeah. Do you what do you think of sequels in general in terms of writers? Because I know like when you're making a sequel for a movie, it can be a very different thing, at least in my opinion, than a sequel to a book in terms of the quality, the perceived quality.
Well, the way that I kind of look at things is I'm more interested in like authors and like their works in as commentaries on each other. So like you take like, if you read, I think the best way to read and like understand an author's work is to like read through them chronologically and to see like the development of their shit. So like, their second book is obviously going to be a sequel to their first book, like even if it's not containing the same characters and stuff, but like thematically it will be a response to what was done in the first one in some way. It'll either as like diverting from it or like developing upon it. Mm-hmm. So that's the way I really view it. Like as far as it comes to like franchise films or something, like that notion of a sequel, like I don't know. I don't really care.
Well,
but
yeah, that's the thing. I think the word, the phrase franchise films is an oxymoron. I don't think you can have a film that's a franchise. I think you can have
I meant more like, like Marvel type shit where it's like all of them.
Well, those are movies. Movies are different than films. That's my decision.
Oh, okay. And then there's also flicks. I got you. Flicks, and there's Kino.
Yeah. Like,
I'm only interested in Kino.
Kino. I think that when the director has control of what he wants to do, doesn't give a fuck about anything else other than putting out from his mind onto the reel, that's a film. When there's any sort of outside involvement, whether that's a studio saying this needs to be in the film for merchandising rights, whether certain characters need to be in it to fulfill the audience's wants and needs, then that's a movie. And that's why, like, with the last Star Wars, like, I've come to the realization that, like, The Last Jedi was an awful film, but I've come around to be like, I like the essence of the idea behind it. Do you remember that film at all, or the movie?
The Last Jedi.
Yeah,
I haven't
middle
seen the
one.
newest one. No,
The
but
middle
I
one.
kind of enjoyed it. I didn't watch it for a long time after it came out. I saw it on a flight, like, actually only like a couple of months ago, really.
Yeah.
So, like, I was like, I had already, like, ingested, like, the whole cultural moment of everyone freaking out about it or, like, caring about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, a year later, I watched it, and I was like, I kind of appreciated that it was like almost like a suicide run, which is kind of what the movie is about itself, is like using that huge fucking like freighter to like as like a kamikaze fucking.
Yeah,
That's like kind of what it felt like as a franchise, was like using this huge franchise and like blowing it up in some sort of way. And I found that interesting.
I think, like, if you just watch it as a movie just to be like entertained and like enjoy a story, it's one of the worst films ever made. But if you want to watch it and enjoy, like, the context of, like, Disney Star Wars getting blown up, right? Like, what it means, like, somebody just coming in with like a wrecking ball and just fucking up everything. It's very interesting.
It's more interested like as like a meta commentary on like itself than it is as an actual fucking movie.
Yeah. In terms of movies, like, what do you find yourself pushed towards in terms of?
Oh,
like,
man,
I
used to watch a lot of movies.
I know you on the TL. I know you on the TL. You're pretty critical of my little cinema. So I want to hear what you think.
I'm like, I used to be really into movies, and there was a time when I wanted to make movies because, I always wanted to make things, and I was like, people don't read books, but like movies are like, an art form that people actually care about. So like maybe I should try to do that. And I used to like make movies and stuff when I was younger. And I got pretty good at editing software. And like, I thought I wanted to do this, but then the more I got involved in film shoots and shit, the more I realized that like, I really don't want to make any art where I have to like manage like actors' feelings and shit. Like, fuck that shit. Actors are the worst people in the fucking world, and like all of this other sort of shit sucks.
Unless you're a tyrant unless you're a tyrant to your ideas, you can't properly make.
Bruh, the thing is though, is that there's so much contingency involved in like the creation of a movie, like monetarily, like equipment wise, especially like early on, that you're mostly like the best you can do is like making the best out of the shit you've been handed. So like, you're never going to have like, until you have like millions of dollars and like, a production crew and all these other you have to like the ability, like what you have to do to be able to get into a place where you can even make like uncompromising movies is like, not only is there so much luck involved in like getting positions in the first place, but like you have to fucking like gain your fucking stripes by create like it's like the amount of persistence and the amount of work you'd have to do like doing shitty stuff to get to a point where you'd be allowed to maybe make something like that's your own vision is like almost insane, as opposed to like writing a book where all you have to do is just fucking like sit down and write a book and it can be whatever you want it to be. I couldn't handle that.
Film, I think to do it right, film is one of the hardest art forms, not because of the actual art itself, which can be difficult, but I think in terms of like complexity and overall, like if you plan it out like Hitchcock, like the actual shooting is easy, but just fucking dealing with so much, like 50 people, like just like you said, it's a train wreck if you're not like 100% everybody's on board, right? Like you have your own funding, everything's, if you have to go through Hollywood, deal with a bunch of people they give you, and then deal with actors that they wanted and like you kind of want because they fit the role, but then they're just like fucking actors and they're like, I'm making $4 million.
That's not even talking about like dealing with like the people funding it or whatever. Talking about like the monetary concerns, like, like, oh god, like it's really so much more of a business than it is like an art form. So like it's always amazing to me when like good movies are made or like good things in that medium are made, because I feel like there's so many impediments to it. Same thing with video games. Video games, it might be even worse. Like
Oh,
a
definitely.
good video game is like a miracle, really, because
It's like
gaming is so much worse even than Hollywood.
you think of like CD Project Red. There's that Polish company. They made the Witcher games. Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
those are apparently like I haven't played a game in like 2 years. Those are phenomenal. Like super good, like storyline, blah blah, all this deep stuff. And then it's like the one studio because they're in Poland. They're like, we don't give a fuck. Like we're just gonna make this game that we want to make. Whereas, and
Yeah.
honestly, I got to give credit though to like things like Nintendo, which like still makes games. They don't try to make like epic shooter movie fucking productions. They just make games. They're just like, I'm just gonna hop on this
Yeah.
thing.
Well, so I don't know. As far as movies go, I was thinking these random people asked me my top favorite movies, like in real life, like when I was out drinking the other day. Like they were just like going around asking people, like,
Yeah.
"What are your like 5 favorite movies or whatever?" And I like gave a list like off the top of my head, and they were like, "Oh, I don't know, like what the fuck you're talking about." So
Yeah.
like like my taste in movies are kind of like arbitrary, I guess, or like kind of random. But I really like Wong Kar-wai movies, like most particularly like fucking Chungking Express, like In the Mood for Love. What's his one called like 2046 or something? It's like a fucking room number, but also a year. So it's one of those things that I always get confused with like 2666 and all these other books with the same fucking conceit as a title. I really like him, really like David Lynch stuff, really like Bellatar, Tarkovsky, a lot of like old classic type shit. I used to be really like a film buff or whatever, and like fucking hang out with film nerd kids and watch like fucking, you know, experimental Andy Warhol fucking movies while like everyone was smoking weed or whatever. Like that was just like a kind of fucking pseudo art school type thing, I guess, that people did. But I don't really care about movies that much anymore.
Yeah.
I rarely see them, and I usually see them late.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I found too. I'm just not interested in what's being put out most of the time. There's one. Actually, there's two studios. There's two studios that I think that you should just peruse their gallery of. A24
I knew
and
you were gonna say A24, but go on.
A20
What's the other one?
and Cine State.
Okay, I've heard
And
good things. You know, I'm just
Cine
also
State,
like,
Cine State, like it's not like high art trying to be like all like fucking pretentious and up there and whatnot. They just literally have like Vince Vaughn and Mel Gibson doing like dirty cop movies and like
oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I've seen those. Those guys are both there. They're both like making movies. You know, they're making
yeah,
like
and like
movies in like the old sense.
City State's based in Dallas. It's all independent funding. It's all like they write their own scripts. Like it's all like westerns and like good quality like crime and old like if they had to do like you know John Wayne and Dirty Harry and push them into today with today's sensibilities, like that would be what they'd be doing.
Yeah, they're like old fucking. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Now,
A24 has put out a lot of good stuff. They've it. I'm like amazed at how much stuff A24 puts out now. I don't know where they're getting funding or whatever, but they put out that like Uncut Gems, right? And they also did like the Lighthouse thing and like a lot of those like kind of artsy horror movie things, right?
yeah, like Midsummer was like mediocre, but it's still something different, Like there's
Yeah,
lots.
they just I don't know where they came out of somewhere and now they're just like a big cultural force. It's pretty interesting in
I,
this day and
I
age.
think what I read up on, and I think this is an interesting way to make money, is that what you do is you start out and like you find small films and you just watch them and then you find out which ones are good and then you give them like 100K to distribute it and then they make like twice their money back and whatnot and then they didn't start by like giving people money for films. They just started by like distributing
Giving people
ones that were already
distribution.
made and like not getting anywhere and then they had a good eye for quality to start off.
That's interesting. So like that's like almost like so it really started out as like a curatorial sort of venture. And
Yeah, they were
now
just
like
like
yeah.
you put our stamp on it and like we'll do all the distribution and whatnot and you'll get this percentage of it and then like okay
That's
cool.
pretty cool. I didn't know that about them.
Yeah, so that's why I respect them. Like honestly, it's not just like a fucking massive corporation just
Yeah, like that's the thing that like, you know, that's the thing also I find annoying, I guess, about some of like socialist types or whatever, is that oftentimes like the only places where any good shit really comes out, especially artistically, is like from businesses that are just well managed. Like, you know, you need like this kind of level of coordination and these sorts of business hierarchies in order to make anything happen at all. Like, you know, in some fucking voluntarist paradise, like no movies would be made, because you'd have to have people like subjecting their will to the will of the fucking film, you know.
Exactly.
Like,
Like that's what obviously we're gonna bring this guy back. He hasn't been talked about for like a whole year probably, but like Jordan Peterson, right? He talked about how you know, like you need to have the liberals to create the ideas, and you need to have the conservatives to run them, right? And it's like it's a very simple like dichotomy, but it is true. Like nobody's gonna do things if there's not like a structure behind it, unless there's like a
yeah, there has
hierarchical
to be,
system.
and it's also like based in money. Like you do need to have these things funded.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like I can't, like the communist dream really is that everyone will make like movies, like Sims movies or whatever, like at home, and everyone will be a little artist and have the ability to just automate feature length blockbuster productions according to like whatever parameters they prescribe.
Yeah.
But
I
I
mean,
don't really believe that's feasible. So like, you know, if you want art,
yeah, art's the one domain you can't fuck with. I think like no matter what, like art brings things back to reality.
in
Surprisingly.
some senses, but the whole social, like, you know, socialist realism, like the project of socialism is to suppress art. Like if you think about like a trichotomy of like politics, meaning like, you know, discourse and like dialectic, you have like art, and you have like economics. Like you can look at a lot of different systems, and like most of the time the communist argument is that fascism is when like art dominates economics and politics. It's like, you know, like, and then communism is just the dominance of economics and art by politics. So like, you know, that like political correctness or whatever is essentially the same motive as like the communist form of social control, where like you subject everything to politics.
Yeah.
Politics becomes like
Politics is
the
everything.
hegemon. Yeah, everything is political, is what they say.
And that's what's been happening. Literally everything, some political slant to it these days. Something.
Well, you know, it's just like that. You can say that of anything, right? You could say there's also like an artistic side to everything, or you could say that there is an economic side to everything, right? And
But out of those three, politics is just especially just maybe we're just overexposed to it now, but it's just so boring and ugly, and it just ruins so much stuff. Like if
well, yeah,
injecting
it's
art,
like the
injecting
most
art into
vulgar thing.
things, injecting art into things, you know, and giving that an artistic edge, even if it is like a subversive edge, like at least it's done. I find when something like that is done, it's done in a much more tasteful and sort of, this is an awful fucking word, I can't think of it, like a polite way, like a, you know, it's put in there. But if it's a political message that's jammed in, it's jammed in, right? They show you it.
Well, it's kind of interesting because like there's totally different goals for those types of art, right? So like the more like propagandistic or like, you know, political art that you're talking about
Mhm.
isn't really asking you to recognize like the value of the art itself, but it's asking you to like become the kind of person who would recognize it as like the truth. Like it's sort of when people like late night pundits will make jokes and they don't get laughter but they get applause. It's a different form of recognition.
Right.
Whereas like, you know, something that's only trying to be recognized on its like artistic merits or whatever doesn't
Right.
really matter like what you take away with it, as long as it's made like an impression at all.
Mm-hmm. It's kind
Like
of like,
you're not trying to have like to like curate the exact fucking response to it. Like, but that's what a propagandistic thing is trying to do, is trying to like mold your brain into a very specific conclusion.
you just brought up like socialist realism. I just finished that Boris Groys book. It's an excellent description of like what happens when art becomes top down for a specific goal rather than just for the artist's goal, right?
Yeah, like his whole thing is like I studied with him. He's one of the best professors I ever had. Had him a few times. That book's great. Yeah, see, like I have like a weird set of influences because like taking classes with him was like hugely influential on my intellectual development, and he gave us some of the weirdest fucking shit that almost no one anywhere like would give for readings to students, and a lot of stuff that was like out of print a lot of like rare like Russian futurist texts and stuff like this.
Yeah.
That have been like hugely influential in the way that I think about things. But it's like a whole corpus of work that is like basically unheard of, and often doesn't even get read like in Russia. So
Right.
like I have a lot of like Russian or like Eastern European friends. Some of them will read this stuff, but a lot of them haven't heard of it themselves.
Nice. Well, Logo, was a great time talking to you. We learned a lot myself, and a lot of people will definitely get some value from this cast. Why don't you let people know like where they can find your stuff and like, you know, anything else you want to, you know,
Yeah.
for.
As I always say with these things, you probably already know who I am. Considering that our audiences probably aren't that different. But if you don't, I'm Logo Daedalus. That's logo_Daedalus on Twitter. I have a book out called Selfie Suicide, which you could find if you Google those two words together. And it's available for purchase. And people think it's pretty damn good, or people read the preview and get really mad about it. So, you know, do one of those.
Do one of those two things. All right. It was a fantastic talk with you, and I hope to see your new book coming out very soon.
Oh, we'll see, man. I'm working on it. Thanks, though.
Excited to read it.
Peace.
Peace.